So we're going to talk about redfish and artificial lures and fishing today. So a little bit about me. I'm a third generation native fisherman of Tampa Bay. My grandfather was actually one of the founding members or charter members of Old Salt. So it's a little cool piece of history and how it kind of flowed down to me. I'm sure he'd be proud. Great fisherman. Definitely an Old Salt. So I was born and raised in Safety Harbor at the north end of Tampa Bay. Luckily, my parents provided me with the opportunity as a little kid to be on a boat and really enjoy and embrace fishing and find the love that not everybody has, and I found that you can't really force it on people. It's kind of in your blood. So 60% of my charters are usually in Tampa Bay. I also charter in Charlotte Harbor, Louisiana. I was just up there a bunch for some tournaments. I fished a lot of the pro tournaments, IFA, Power Pull Down Series, the Elite Series. But if I'm not running charters, I'm usually out throwing artificials for redfish. So obviously redfish are my favorite fish. They're my passion. A lot of guys are hardcore tarpon guys. You know, they live or die for tarpon season. I love redfish all year long. All right, so some of the stuff that I want to talk to you guys about is when you're fishing a new area, or even, you know, you get a weekend to go fishing or whenever that might be, kind of some of the prep that I do beforehand. And one of the main things I do is I get on Google Maps. And I, you know, even though I've been fishing in the bay my entire life, I still get on the Google Maps almost every night. I lay on the couch and I'm looking at the same stuff I've looked at over and over and over. So what I look for is creek mouths. Redfish love creek mouths, especially this time of year. They like that cool, tannic, fresh water that's pouring in. Another big thing for low tide and more winter time is little fingers. And what I mean by that is, like, if you have a big flat and you look on Google Maps and you see little drainage canals where that tide runs through, a lot of those redfish like to lay in those on low tide. And of course, salt and pepper bottom, potholes. A little bit shallower than you guys might throw for trout, which are in the 4 to 6 range generally. Redfish are in the 1.5 to 3 foot depth range. Wintertime, I look for sand or mud bottom with banks for the fish to cruise on. A lot of times, one of my favorite things to do, and that time of year is coming up, is finding the redfish that are cruising right along the sandy mangrove edges. And sight casting them is so much fun. Also, those fingers that I was talking about, those are very important. There's a few areas, you know, behind Honeymoon, north end of the bay. Down here on this spoil island, they have the little runoff troughs that these fish literally sit and float in when the tide's real low. And that's a pretty cool way to find them too, is just to idle around and look for them floating in the little fingers. Summertime, creek mouths, mangrove shorelines next to deep grassy flats. Even though the redfish really like to push up into the trees in the summertime with their big high tides, they really like to hang out in the deeper water too, I've come to find. You know, 3-4 feet, they bury themselves in the cool tannic water that's flowing out of the creek mouth. So if you can find that, that's usually pretty good. So this time of year, I love catching redfish on deep docks. If you can find a dock with some moving water, 10-15 feet, good chance there's going to be redfish there if it's close to a grass flat. Late summer and fall, you know, the fish start to school up, which they're starting to do now, which is a great time to catch them. You can find them on these afternoons like this one where we don't have a lot of storms. You can see their big pushes. And all right, so some of the things you're looking for when you're looking for a redfish waking, a lot of mullet you'll see pushed around, and they have a crazy little scattered wake and a bunch of little humps behind their head. Redfish generally move in straight lines, and they have two waves behind their head from their big old fat heads pushing. So that's a good way to tell the difference. Generally, I like to throw a 7 to 7'6" spinning rod, medium light, medium, and medium heavy, and they all have their purpose. So my medium light rod, I generally have it rigged up with a worm, a little soft plastic worm, and I'll show you those in a minute. And I use that for when I'm sight casting fish or throwing to a tailing fish. My medium rod, I've got rigged up with a paddle tail, a Z-Man paddle tail. And those are great for search baits. That's probably my number one lure, is throwing a paddle tail. My third rod is a medium heavy rod, and I usually have a top water like a she dog or top dog, mirror lure tied onto it, or a spoon. Or what I've really been getting into lately is throwing chatterbaits. All right, on those rods I usually use a 3000 series spinning reel, rigged with 8 to 10 pound line. And that's because I try and throw the lightest line I can possibly get away with, because our fish are so pressured and so spooky. Long, accurate casts are very, very important. When you throw a bait way out, you're usually going to get a strike in the first 10, 15 feet that you throw. So the farther the cast, the higher percentage you are to catch a fish without them seeing you. I think it's very important. Everybody laughs when I say that I'm putting an 8-pound test on my spinning rod, and then they laugh when I take 5-10 minutes to reel them in, and everybody's yelling at me, "Get that fish to the boat!" So, and then for docks, I like to use big, heavy tarpon rods, because those redfish that live in there are usually pretty big. So another thing that is very important is a good pair of sunglasses. I love my Maui Jims. I've used a lot of different brands of sunglasses. They're the best. A good hat with a dark-sided underside on the brim. Leader material, I use fluorocarbon. When the water's clear, I use 12-pound to 15-pound. A lot of people laugh at that too, but it makes a difference when you're sight casting fish. So, and then in dirty water, I'll step it up a little bit, 20, 25 pound, but still trying to stay as light as possible, even though I do agree with the theory that if a fish is going to eat your bait, it's going to eat your bait no matter what kind of leader you have on it. Alright, so I brought a couple baits to show you guys. Brought some of my worms. Can't believe I'm showing you guys this. This is my secret. Starting to catch on a little bit. A little tiny worm. Looks like all kinds of different stuff. The redfish can't seem to resist it. And these I just kind of bounce real slow along the bottom and they don't refuse it. So this is another style. This is called a hula stick by Z-Man. It's a little bit longer of a worm. Sometimes I'll trim it to make it shorter, but it's got these cool little legs on it. So Z-Mans float. So when these sit in the water, it'll just kind of float there and wiggle just like that. Now Z-Man just came out with a special hook just like this one. It's called a chin locks. Okay, she's gonna hold the microphone. Alright, so I don't know if any of you freshwater fish, but it's pretty much the same style. It's called a Texas rig. Z-Man is very stretchy material, and these are, in my opinion, the best soft plastics made. So you have to use a special hook. Those twist locks, I don't know if any of you have used the twist lock where you twist they work, but it's a pain to twist them all the way on. You end up spinning the jig all the way around your neck, it feels like, to get it on the dang hook. So what you do, this is a grip pin. You just put it in a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch. Pop it straight through. Slide it all the way up, twist, spin it, so it lays like that, and then punch it straight through. So it sits just like that, and it floats down, pop it up, floats down, and then it'll lay on the bottom like that and just kind of wiggle in the fish's face. And they work really well for snook. Almost anything eats these. It's incredible. I started fishing them about 2 years ago, and it's my favorite lure for anything. My next favorite all-around lure to throw is called a minnows by Z-Man. It's just a paddle tail. This is probably caught as many fish as a gold spoon. These are my #1 go-to search bait when I'm in new areas, blind casting. No matter the species, I mean, you can catch anything that eats a minnow of any kind on these. And you rig this the same style, or the same way, but they make a special hook for them. And this is called the Texas eye. Put it in, flip it around, Pop it up through. And then this actually is on a little swivel, or not a swivel, but a joint, like a jointed Rapala. I don't know if you guys remember those from way back in the day. So it'll move, and it has a ton of action. And this is a killer rig. It's weedless, hands down. Those are probably the two things that I throw the absolute most. All right, so we got our surge baits, which are the paddle tails. I like to throw the worms for when I'm sight fishing, or I'll even use them for surge baits if I'm moving real slow. So I'm a big believer in scent, like Procure, adding that kind of stuff to your lures. I think that if fish are being picky, it might make the difference. There's no real fact or no real proven anything, but in my personal experience, I think scent can make the difference. All right, so now we'll talk about how to approach fish. Anybody have any questions at all? Rigs?
You got a favorite color for different kinds of water, or?
Yeah. So I was going to talk about that later, but this is a perfect spot to talk about it. So redfish and any fish that lives under, I believe it's like 6 feet or shallower, their sight perception is generally more in the red wavelengths. So they see reds and greens the best. So I try and throw a lot of reds, like this has a red flake in it with a green tail. This worm right here is gold flake with green flake on a green worm with red flake on the top side. Just because if they see it, they're probably going to eat it. Now, fish generally that live 6 feet or deeper, they see purple and blues the best. So that's why you guys might, catch more grouper when you're trolling with a purple plug. So that I think color makes a difference too. Now in dirty water, I like to throw a little bit of chartreuse like that tail, and a little bit more flash. When it's super bright and sunny out, I like to throw, and in clear water, I like to throw lures that are more translucent, so they're more see-through. And I believe I brought one for an example. So it would be something like this that's a little more see-through, more translucent, not a lot of flash, lighter colors in clear water. Darker colors I like. Darker colors with flash with a little bit of chartreuse. Blues work well in dark water. Reds, kind of the same stuff that a lot of the bass guys throw. Works for redfish. Same theories of color. Now in tannic water, I like to throw gold. Gold works really well in water that's super clear but tannic. And we have a lot of that around right now. What was the other question?
Your hooks, they're weighted. Is it a jig head, like 4 ounce?
Yes, sir. So both of these hooks are weighted. This single worm hook has a little keel weight on it right here. This is 1/8 ounce. Now sometimes if I like to go heavier, I'll put a little bullet weight on the top, just like bass fishing. And recently I've started using tungsten weights because they're smaller and I can put a little more weight on it and it doesn't splash as much in the water. And I'll add a bobber stop to it so that it keeps the weight right up on the hook. All right. Anybody else? Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
This might be a dumb question. I've only lived here a year, so.
No dumb questions. They're all good.
We were offshore and we caught a gigantic red. I think it was a red. Mm-hmm. We released it. Did they go offshore? I mean, what's their...
Yes, so his question was that he was offshore and he caught a big redfish. Yes. So the reason why all of our fish are schooling up right now is because all the bigger fish are schooling up to go offshore and spawn. So there's different theories that a lot of people think that once the fish move from inland to offshore, they stay offshore and they just...
When did they go offshore?
In the fall.
In the fall, right around the kingfish.
Yeah, pretty much. So another big issue that we've been having and why the season's still closed on redfish is because last year with the red tide, normally FWC flies around and they see 10 or 15 different massive schools of the big breeder redfish offshore.
We ran into a school, I thought it was a school of kings, we were casting and then we let it go right away.
Yeah.
It was massive. It was the biggest fish.
Yeah, they get big. So they school up offshore. They find like 15 of these schools in our local area, pretty much regularly every year. But the red tide that we had killed almost every single one of them. They went out, last year they only found one of these schools, and then they went out a few days later and they just saw miles and miles of dead redfish. So that's a big issue that's breaking a lot of people's hearts, mine included. But if we can fix our water quality issue and not have this keep happening every year, nature has a great ability of bouncing back and recovering. So another important thing when you're fishing for fish, and that's almost any type of fish, is finding a pattern. So I put everything together, my homework, my lures, and I tried to deduce similarities that have happened throughout the day or throughout the week or throughout the last couple weeks or on the same tides that I've been fishing. And I have a saying that if you catch one fish a certain way, it's a fluke. 2 fish a certain way, it's a coincidence. 3 fish a certain way, you've developed a pattern. So that's what I try and live by that. Now, patterning is great, and then figuring them out is even better, to the point where redfish, if you find them in a school and schooling up, you can't chase them down and try and cut them off. So what I like to do is I try and figure out the pattern. I try to figure out where they're going, where they're coming from, what they're doing on certain tides and wind directions, and I try to beat them to their spot. So fish in general will move and then stage, move and then stage, move and then stage on each part of the tide. So I try and find where they want to be, cut them off, catch them. For example, last night I was fishing. I sat on this one point with a little bit of an edge, a little bit of a roll off right off the mangrove line, and I just sat and watched monster redfish after monster redfish funnel right to me, and I sat there for like 3 hours and just caught them. So that's one of my favorite ways to fish. I hate chasing down redfish, especially on a charter. It's just too difficult. All right, so when you're sight fishing redfish, I like to do here what I call 5 by 3. So I lead the fish when I'm casting to him. I try and lead him by 5 feet and pass him by about 3 feet. So you want the lure to be right where he's at by the time he gets there. You never want to reel into the fish. So I like to lead him, bring it to him, let it sit there, and then make it act like it's swimming away from him. And they usually can't turn it down. They do what's called the kitty cat wiggle when they see it. It's my favorite thing to watch them stare at it and belly up and then just charge at it and kill it. It's great. You never want to reel your bait straight into a fish. And you guys, I'm sure, know you never cast over a fish's back. You want the bait to look as natural as possible. You don't want, what predator fish catches or has little bait fish swimming directly in its mouth all the time? Very rarely. So a lot of times they'll spook. So you want the bait to be swimming away from them, or at least some kind of angle away from them. So another important thing is matching the hatch. When you pull onto a flat, the very first thing that I look for is life. I look for stingrays, I look for birds, I look for mullet, anything, bait in the water, and 9 times out of 10 there's going to be predator fish there. If there's not bait, there's not going to be fish for them to eat. Another thing I like to look for is birds. Birds are, offshore you guys look for birds and whatnot, diving on bait. Same thing except with wading birds and spoonbills. The man in the pink suit, they're feeding on crustaceans and the same stuff that redfish are feeding on. Any questions? What's up?
What kind of knots do you tie? Like line to line?
Alright, so the question was, what kind of knots do I tie? Depends on line size a lot. If I'm throwing a smaller leader to braid, I like to use just a uni-to-uni knot, because with the smaller diameter it goes to the guides pretty well. I also like FG knots when I tie any leader over like 25 pounds. It's a great knot, especially for tying bigger diameter lures or leaders. The question is, what's my favorite way to work a lure? Top water? Okay, top water I like walk the dog. You know, that's pretty awesome. Oh, there's a great lure that you guys should try called a Whopper Plopper. It's pretty cool. It's like a buzzbait almost, except it's streamlined like a Zahara spook with a tail on the back. Kills snook. They can't resist it. Subsurface, so paddle tails, I really think work the best. Just throwing it out and reeling it straight in. I like to bump the bottom a little bit, you know, to make sure I'm reeling it at the right speed. Keep it right off the bottom. I think that works the best. Just a straight reel. I know I used to jig it and work it and all that kind of stuff, but I found the best way fish react to it is having it swim by them. They just turn around, swim up behind it, check it out, and eat it. When it's bouncing around, I think it can kind of spook them as well. But as always, you know, throw what works. So if you're throwing and straight reeling it in and you're not having any luck, throw it, jig it, work it a little bit, let it sit on the bottom, reel it, you know, find the pattern, find what works. Another thing I like to do when I'm sight casting is throwing and barely moving it when I know the fish sees it. So I'll let it sit on the bottom and just lift the rod tip just a little bit. If you pull it away from them or do too much too quick, I find that kind of spooks the fish. Letting the fish find the bait on their own is, I think it works very well. So you guys could try that. Okay, so the question is with the Whopper Plopper, how am I working it in? How am I retrieving it? I just throw it out and I just wind it straight in. Just a constant resonance. I mean, I'll play with it like always. If I'm not catching stuff, straight reeling, I'll reel, pause. But like reeling in the paddle tail, I find that fish kind of like it the best when they can hone in on it and watch it for a couple seconds and then come up and eat it instead of pausing and moving and all that stuff. All right, cool. Well, that's all I got. Hope you guys learned something. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.